So we've seen in part 1, chapter 23, Hobbes moves through this series of judgments, basically. Some empirical judgments, that is his empirical premises, moving on to something that's a little less observational, from an equality of hope, then moving on and on and on, until finally he gets this conclusion, he arrives at this conclusion, this inference that if you don't have an overarching power to keep us all in check, you're going to get this war of all against all, and we're going to live in fear, it's going to be isolated, poor, nasty, brutish, short. And what's really going on here? Well, if you look at the nature, at human nature, you have three principal, probably more, the three principal causes of this. You have competition, diffidence, and glory. So Hobbes says, okay, maybe you don't like my argument, right? Maybe you think this is all highly speculative. How do you know all this stuff? How do you know this war of all against all, etc., etc.? Maybe you want more proof. Maybe you don't like the argument here. Maybe you want something a little bit more down to earth. Like, really, come on. You come up with this. So this final move of Hobbes, you might say that there's no overarching power to keep us all in check. Therefore, you're going to get this crazy war of all against all. I don't know. I'm not buying it, you could say to Hobbes. And Hobbes says, that's fine. That's fine. There's going to be, as he says, you want more proof? Well, let's see what Hobbes says. Fine. It may seem, quote, it may seem strange to some man that has not well weighed these things, that nature should thus dissociate and render men apt to invade and destroy each other. And he may therefore, not trusting to this inference, right? All this is this big chain of argument, not trusting it, Hobbes says, fine. This inference made from the passions, right? These passions that we have, and desire perhaps to have the same confirmed by experience, right? So Hobbes is saying, okay, you don't buy all this, you don't buy this notion and all the things that I'm building into the system, and you want experience. Hobbes says, fine. This is Hobbes' next move. Quote, let him therefore consider with himself when taking a journey. He arms himself. And we don't really do that so much anymore. But in Hobbes' day, it was very dangerous to travel from town to town. So if you went out on the highway, you would be afraid, definitely, or at least deeply concerned about encountering a highwayman, which is basically a robber. I doubt if now many of us, at least certainly in a place like where I am, in Canada, we're not terribly worried about, if you take a drive between Ottawa and Montreal or Edmonton and Calgary, you're not really worried about being robbed on the highway. At least, that would be highly unusual and would certainly make headlines. And I don't think when we say to people, bon voyage, we're not really saying, and make sure you're armed. But in Hobbes' day, he said yes. But nonetheless, let's continue on a bit more. He says, go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this when he knows there be laws, and public officers armed to revenge all injuries shall be done him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his door, and of his children and servants when he locks his chests. So if you do take steps, Hobbes says, that you protect yourself, if you're taking those kinds of steps, even though when you know that there is a power in place, that there's the police, there's an overarching power. If someone steals from you, you know that there is an overarching power, according to Hobbes' argument. You know this, that's set up to try and catch that and punish those people that do you injury. Nonetheless, you still take precautions. You still act as if, yeah, this could happen, and I'm still going to protect myself. So what are you saying, Hobbes says? Right? Hobbes says that if you do all these things, even when there is a power in place, does he, the one who does all this, does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? So Hobbes says, yeah, I've got an argument for all this to lead up to this. And you may disagree with my argument. You may talk give me this great speech that you don't agree with it, and yet you go out and do all the things as if you believe it, right? And you believe it because even though there is an overarching power, you're still acting as if this is kind of going on, Hobbes says. Maybe not to this extreme, but you're still taking all those steps, even though you know it's illegal and there are police and laws and all that stuff that could help to prevent it or whatever. Hobbes says you nonetheless act as if you're in this kind of situation. So you're basically saying the same thing about humans that I am. And so you're not even believing what you claim is that you believe. Whether or not, there was this actual condition of the war of all against all, literally, in this sense that it was all wide open like this and there was no government. Hobbes is saying it's not absolutely crucial for my argument. So Hobbes is saying that his argument can still stand, even though maybe some of the particular premises or some of the particular conclusions aren't necessarily true, like historical facts. That there's probably never been a situation where there's been, people living together in some kind of community and there's no overarching power at all. He says that doesn't really matter. My argument will still go through if you think about these premises up here being the case, that these are all true up here. Whether or not there's actually ever been a situation like this, that doesn't really matter. It still is the case that if there were an total absence of government or absence of a superstructure to keep everybody in check, this proposition would be true, right? So it doesn't matter if there's never actually been a case of it. So it doesn't really, Hobbes doesn't think that this affects his argument, although he does make a reference here to the international situation, which he says is kind of like a war of all against all. And in Hobbes's day, there wasn't anything like the UN or anything like that. In Hobbes's time, he says that nation states are poised like gladiators, right? They are building alliances, but basically they're on their own. No one's going to look after a nation state except that nation state. So they're all self-interested, driven to look after themselves and get what they can. So Hobbes says, if you want sort of a state of nature, look at in the international situation. And that view around of nations basically being self-interested, and nations do what's good for them. They put themselves first, and they work with other nations insofar as that working with other nations helps them. That's often referred to as political realism or Hobbesian realism in international affairs. That view is still around today, and some politicians have openly expressed it, like by saying, well, I do for my country first, and I worry about, if at all, I worry about anybody else as a subsidiary concern. This has a long history, so Hobbes is definitely saying that that's what the realist that's a realist view of international relations, like gladiators, right, arming themselves and guns on their forts and things like that. Everybody is in a posture of war, and and he also makes a few comments that we should think about. In such a war, then, this open sort of crazy war of all against all, nothing is unjust, right? And he says, to this war of every man against every man, this is also consequent. This follows, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice, injustice, no place there, right? So in this situation here, doesn't make any sense to talk about ethics, right? So Hobbes, if you notice, in Hobbes's, if we pull back, recall that I told you that Hobbes was just worried about particles, matter, moving around, human passions. Again, we're just corporeal objects, just like other things. We have passions in us, but we're kind of like just other animals. Where's morality there? Well, it doesn't really exist. Not yet. It comes later and has a kind of existence, but it doesn't come down to us. It grows out of our relationships with each other. So, so where there is no common power, there is no law. So no law without a lawgiver, right? So there's no morality without morality giver. Something has to give forth the law. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. Justice and injustice are none of the faculties, neither of the body nor of the mind. So he's going against a lot of tradition there that you know that these things aren't really part of us, right? What's really part of us is this sort of nasty kind of self-interested tendency to maximize and get what we can get. But again, we have reason, we can calculate, and that's what can help get us out of this mess. So there's no property, no dominion, no mine and thine distinct. But only that to be every man's that he can get, and it's not wrong, right? It's not right either. It's outside of this conceptual framework of wrong and right. So when people are fighting and killing each other in this war of all against all, it's not right or wrong. It's just people doing stuff, right? And they're behaving naturally. And so nature is just we're placed in it. That's about all you have to say. So the passions that incline us to peace, we have passions there too, which is good. We have reason to help us figure things out, and we have a passion for peace. What is it? Fear of death, right? I'm scared of getting killed. I don't want to get killed, right? I'm going to fight to try and preserve myself, but I certainly don't want to be killed. Or as Hobbes says, fear of death. We have desires. We want nice things, right? So I want to have nice things. And remember, in the incommodities of war, I'm not going to get nice things, really. Like if I'm just going to simply look after my own desires and not think about anyone else, I'm risking getting killed, and I'm also not going to get nice stuff, right? So what do? I'd be better off if I got together and made some deals, right? I'm not going to kill you, you're not going to kill me. So now we have the emergence of some kind of structure that we're going to buy into, accept, agree to live within. So, and reason suggesteth convenient articles of peace upon which men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are sometimes called the laws of nature. Now, this gets into some complex stuff with Hobbes about laws of nature and reason and political structures dovetailing. We're not going to dig really into that. But the point is up until now, up until this sort of this structure comes into being, now it's going to reflect a larger structure in the universe. But really, in this war of all against all, there is no justice, but there are passions. And the passions to peace are basically fear of death and passions to have a nice life. We're going to try and do our best to get along.